Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I am joined today by a very special guest. I am so excited to have our guest here, where we can talk and we can get to hear more about his really amazing film journey. And I speak about his film journey because those of you who are watching, you may recognize him from his own great film discussions and analyses and his great film YouTube channel called A Touch of Film. This is our dear friend Hus. Hus, hello.
Daisuke. Hello, Daisuke. You almost said a touch of sin. I could see it in your eyes.
Or Zen.
How's it going?
Yeah.
Or Zen.
Good. Yeah, I'm good. How are you, my friend?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's honor to be on your channel. Honestly, it really is.
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. The honor and privilege is all mine, believe me, because you are one of the great leading pioneering voices when it comes to bringing a focus and spotlight on certain specific parts of cinema. We call it, maybe in a very general way, Asian cinema, but as we know, it has its own unique features and characteristics depending on the particular part of the world. And so you understand this, and you not only understand this, but you engage with it, you really champion it, and you pioneer it, and you explore it. And not just the physical media component, although that is very impressive. Not just that, you have a great understanding and insight into these films and filmmakers from these various parts of the world. And so you are, for my money, one of the great leaders and teachers when it comes to cinema. So it's a real pleasure to have you here today, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Your words mean a lot to me, my friend. Yeah, I mean, I just literally started this channel because within my friendship group, I was probably one of the only ones into Asian cinema. As you know, most of my friends were into like horror films and quite mainstream cinema. So I really just started this to create discussions with people, to talk about the films that we obviously love. And there are some weird films from parts of Asia that only a few of us have seen. So it's just great to have these conversations about cinema and the films that we love, Yeah.
That's the point, right? Because
Exactly.
to create this kind of space, if you will, not just for reaching out, but for ourselves, because it's a great outlet. I can certainly understand that. And so but you bring us to your great channel. So before we go into further discussion about your cinema journey, would you mind letting us know about your YouTube channel, perhaps for those who are meeting you for the first time? What can you say about your YouTube channel? What is it called, and what does it focus on in particular?
So A Touch of Film is, I named it after two of my favorite films, A Touch of Zen, A Touch of Sin. And I really wanted to focus on East Asian cinema, some mainstream, but some also titles that people haven't really heard of, and possibly titles that you have to go search for, because I think part of the search allows you to come across other films on the way to that search, like to find that film. You will pick out other films from that director that I've mentioned, and the main focus was on mainland China, Taiwanese, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea. Sometimes I mention Indonesian cinema, but it's mainly on those areas because obviously they're the ones that we have more access to. and people want to know what films to watch from that area, where to buy them. Obviously, uh, we don't always have to rely on physical media, especially now. I mean, films are getting put on streaming services, films that we would never have thought. I mean, recently I've seen so many Johnny Toe films are all getting picked up on streaming service, and I think that's phenomenal. I mean, Johnny Toe, most people, I mean, have probably only seen the election films, but he has so many great titles, and it's not just Johnny Toe. I mean, Jackie Chan is another one. Now we're obviously getting more physical media of Jackie Chan, uh, but yeah, there was a time when a lot of people that I knew didn't even see Project A, which is crazy. Yeah.
No, I can completely understand everything that you say about this being in many ways a type of golden age when it
Mm,
comes to availability and accessibility. And I can recall too certain periods where a lot of these films were pretty much unknown
mm,
for the longest time, and then suddenly, for whatever reason, they started to get some releases, maybe
yeah.
maybe here and there on DVD back in the day, or
Mm,
for Jackie Chan, it might have been a big release of, I don't know, like Rumble in the Bronx or something.
yeah.
Yeah, I completely get it. So it in that way, it's really wonderful that you are providing us with these great, as you say, this channel, which is following your journey and your search. And as you say, part of the fun is trying to find a lot of these things. Even in this age of accessibility, there are still so many opportunities for
Yeah.
surprise and for trying
Of
to hunt
course.
down things. And it can become pretty interesting too when we think about the various releases
Mm,
and that sort of thing. So
exactly.
so
Exactly.
and it's so therefore your channel is a great resource, and it's a wonderful place to interact. And so once again, it's A Touch of Film, and all the details will be in the description box of this channel. But for anyone who hasn't checked it out, please check out A Touch of Film, and comment and subscribe and interact, because it's a great time. And you also do, so you do videos, and you do chats as well. I mean, so could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
So the chats came about during the first UK lockdown of 2020. Um, I have a very close friend, Dion, uh, who also has a YouTube channel. He is a professional movie reviewer. I mean, he writes his movie reviews. Obviously, he has a channel, but he is probably one of the best movie reviewers on YouTube. I honestly, it, I'm not. It, I'm not underestimating him. He is absolutely phenomenal. And we used to talk a lot. We used to meet up at the London Film Festival and discuss cinema. And we've been saying it for ages. We've got to do a stream, even if it's just one time. So with the lockdown, he was furloughed and he had the time. So we said, okay, let's do it every Friday. Let's do this stream. Let's choose different topics. Let's invite other YouTubers on, um, and just see how it goes. The first one we did was just a complete hit. Um, the amount of people that were involved in the conversations, because I would say we both come from two areas of cinema. I mean, Dion he goes to the film festivals. He watches a lot of French cinema. I have the Asian cinema aspect of it, and it came together, and we had this sort of community that were calling themselves like the anti-normies. That's what they used to call each other in the conversations. How we had like one conversation where we just everyone is completely dissing James Cameron, uh, because like we're talking about Avatar, Titanic, and I think it just got into this to talking about other directors that most people like. We'll talk about Mike, but we wouldn't talk about Audition, or we'll talk about Sion Sono, but not talk about Love Exposure, which in most people to most people, it is his masterpiece. So we were just talking about other films that people may not have heard about, and it just it just rolled from there, really. And yeah, we're doing it once a month to see how it goes and see how long it lasts. But they are great fun, and just the people that come into the discussions, it's just just talking about the films we love, really.
Well, that's wonderful, and I'm so glad you mentioned our dear friend Dion. So yes, I'm also a big fan of his, and I was so happy to have found him and his channel when I was first looking for, I think, early reviews on the film Suspiria, and so at
Yeah.
the time he was one of the earliest to have seen it, I think, on the
Mm,
festival circuit. So I think from there
yeah.
it was fascinating. So yeah, he's a
Yeah.
really great, intelligent, very astute observer of cinema.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he teaches film
Yeah,
review,
yeah.
but I mean, if there's any video to start on his channel, is his review of Pain and Glory. I just think it's one of the best reviews, and I've not even seen the film yet. And I just think his review of it is just so passionate, so knowledgeable, and I think he gives such elegance to his reviews. And I think that's was uh, one of the reasons why I have to have him like on my side on this, because it was just something, you know, his knowledge of reviewing is he's sort of like the straight guy in our discussions, because we got the straight guy, we got I get a bit, we get a bit loud in our conversations. I think if anyone's been in there, they do get quite funny. But yeah, they're good, great times.
Oh, and so it's great that you're having this opportunity and these occasions to interact with other voices online, but also with the people who are watching these channels. So that's really great. And so
Mm.
once again, we have this, which is just one of many components, as we say, of your great channel, which is a touch of Zen. I mean, film, a touch of film. So a touch of film, and so this is Huss's channel, a touch of film. So please check it out, my dear friends, if you haven't already, and because it is a lot of fun, and it is, for my money, one of the places that I go for to learn about various films and uh, physical media releases. And so it's because Huss is a wonderful leader, and he is so generous. You are so generous with sharing
Oh,
with us
and
a lot really about your film journey. So I want to thank you so much for the hard work you put into it. And I know it's a lot of work. I know. So, um, and so does take time, and it does take
mm,
a lot of preparation. And so I really want to thank you very much
mm,
for all that you do, and that
it
you
means a
will
lot.
continue to do.
It means a lot. Thank you.
No, 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 really, really. So please keep up the excellent work, because it's allowing us to learn more about you. And I suppose, speaking of which, that leads me to my question, which is, you, of course, are showing us a lot of who you are and your journey, and of course your focus is on what we might call Asian cinema, but I'll get to that in a moment as well. But before that, I must ask you, what were your experiences in terms of your cinema journey growing up? In other words, what were some of those landmark milestone moments in your life, in your cinema life growing up,
Yeah.
that
Well,
led you to the place that you are now as a film enthusiast?
I can tell you my exact journey, because like I think about this sometimes. I just consider myself lucky. So my dad, English wasn't his first language, but one type of film that he always got into was spaghetti westerns. So I used to sit with him and watch a lot of Sergio Leone films. um, the odd Turkish films because Turkish is first language. But my grandmother, she owned a sort of like a house that boarded people in the catering industry, and we had a lot of guys from Hong Kong that lived there because they work in the Chinese restaurants in the area, and I got really close with them. Some of them became like family friends, and it was on my birthday that one of them gave me some VHSs. It was Way of the Dragon, Project A, and I think it was Dirty Ho, the Shaw Brothers movie with Gordon Liu, and it was it was from there that just I was like, whoa, what is this? It was just like an eye-opening moment. Obviously, they were all poorly dubbed, but I think that was part of the romance of them. The moment Bruce Lee first throws a kick and he goes, "Mighty Dragon," whips his tail, and it was that just like, oh my god, this is. I want to see more of this. I want to see everything of this, and it started this this journey to search for every single martial arts movie I could find. Uh, and you know, I left Bruce Lee behind and picked up more Jackie Chan and more Shaw Brothers, just because I love the aesthetic of the Shaw Brothers movies. I think there was something so beautiful to them. So I don't know. It was just the feel, the smell. You could smell these studios, that the way they had these like outdoor sets inside. It felt like a an old musical, but just with so much action and wonder and story. I just fell in love with them, and for a while I was really into martial arts movies till I think I was 14, and I got into anime. But the anime we could get in the UK was not like how anime is today with with Studio Ghibli. The more kids related stuff. Like I was watching stuff like Urotsuki Doji, Doomed Megalopolis, Fist of the North Star, Venus Wars, and it was actually through that because we had a publisher called Manga Entertainment. Even though this was all anime, it was just called Manga Entertainment, and they had a subsidiary which was called the Institute of Contemporary Arts Projects. Now, think of this as Arrow before Tartan Extreme, way before all of those, and it was just like like a boutique label of VHSs, and that was like the thing that clicked. It was I was watching Shinya Tsukamoto, I was watching Takeshi Kitano. The thing that made me fall in love with Japanese cinema was the cover to Violent Cop, which was just Takeshi Kitano standing still like this in black and white, and all you see above him is Violent Cop, and it was just that image was just like, this guy looks so cool. I've not even seen this film. I want to find this film, find everything this label has to offer, and it was just collecting. I mean, they released films that at the time, just looking at them, I've got no, as a young 14-year-old, to see Chungking Express didn't interest me at the time, because they also released Zhu Dao, even Korida's Afterlife. But these movies obviously I had no interest in them. It was just all this weirdness, this action that just appealed to me. And it was later on that I got into Korida and Wong Kar Wai, during the time of like the Tartan Extreme, when that started to come into VHS. So it's like the Arrow 25 years ago. That's basically what it was. Yeah. And
Yeah, because this is in the VHS days too.
yes, yeah. I mean, I don't think people know how lucky they are today
Yes.
that there's labels like Arrow and Third Window Films and all these great labels that are releasing Asian cinema, even Criterion. You know, to hear about Criterion, something like Criterion back then would be like, oh wow, that's amazing. You've got access to all these films. For me, it was just going out to these smaller video stores and just picking up everything they had because it was just so sparse. And uh, ICA just ICA projects just stopped producing VHSs at the time when VHSs stopped and everything went to DVD. They didn't go back to DVD, so you had to wait a while for these movies to get remastered onto DVD. So it's like Tetsuo, and then but that was the time when DVDs came out. It was bigger because then we started getting Miike. We got Rainy Dog, Dead or Alive, and the John Woo movies. So it was just a massive like uh, revolution in cinema for me, really.
And we also have to remember too that for a lot of these, for example, the early days, let's put it that way, of the VHS releases, sometimes these sometimes could be very expensive
Oh,
as
very.
yeah, and you'd be getting, you wouldn't be getting, like for instance, letterboxed wasn't a given all the time, and you'd probably be getting, I think, maybe the English dub version, more or less. Maybe it would be a
Yeah.
big deal if you could get the original language version with
Oh,
the,
yeah.
yeah.
So with the subtitle. I mean, it was really difficult. You think, how many VHSs can you fit on your shelves? I'm like, the small Blu-ray. My mum was having a go at me all the time. Oh, you're buying more. Where are you going to put all of these? I'm like, I had to put them underneath my bed because my cupboards were full. And yeah, they were expensive, very hard to find, and we didn't have the internet, so you had to be on mailing lists to get catalogs being sent to you, so you can order them through post. And it was just like, well, I'll be asking my mum. I'll go, Mum, can you write me a check so I can send this over and buy this, because things was so difficult. We like a pre-internet age of cinema was of Asian cinema in the West was not to be desired. Let's just say it was really hard to pick up titles, but you know it's because we love these films that we'll you know do anything really.
And before I go, I have to say, you had mentioned, I think, in there, for example, like Fist of the North Star, like anime. What was that? I do remember. I do know the English dub version of that as well. So what is it?
Yeah.
I have a splitting headache, or
Yeah.
what is it? The power without perception is virtually useless and therefore
Yeah.
of no true value.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I haven't seen that in such a long time, but
I know. I
uh,
mean, I that company, Manga Entertainment. I mean, I think they're called Manga Video or Films today. I saw a stall of theirs in I think it was Hyper Japan or Comic Con, and I just said to him, I have all these on VHS. Is there any way I can pick these up on Blu-ray now? They go, we don't have the license for them anymore. It's just like we have Devil Man, Venus Wars. Venus Wars hasn't even had a UK release since then. Soki Doji, I don't even know where to find it. I think that's only has a US release. Yeah.
so you're referring to, as I say, these days, and it was a different age. But as you say, it was these discoveries that you were now of filmmakers that are now a part of the general conversation, at least
Mm,
in terms of the community that you're a part of, that we're all a part of. So from there, my friends, so you, as you say, you were getting a little bit older, and you
yeah.
started to, you got into the DVD era, or we all got into the DVD era. And then you were mentioning how this was where you were beginning to find other discoveries and avenues in this area that we can call quote unquote Asian cinema. So
Yeah.
could you, what were some of those discoveries along the way as you were getting a little bit older?
So it was more down to like John Woo films, Miike. I mean, a lot of Miike, because Miike was straight to DVD. A lot of the stuff, so you had access straight away. You wouldn't have to like go to the cinemas to see. So that was the lucky thing. I mean, because he catered for the for it was like he catered for my market of videos. I mean, the Dead or Alive films are just when you watch the first Dead or Alive, the first 7 minutes, I think it's 7 minutes, is just like everything that Miike has ever produced, will produce, is capable of, is just thrown at you, and you know is, and you're just like, yo, I this I'm I want to see everything this man produces. I mean, it is very difficult because you rely on these companies to pick up these titles. I mean, Tartan Extreme was a very unique label at the time. It picked up a lot of the Asian titles, and then we had. I mean, I didn't get into Korean movies till maybe 10 years after this. I mean, I didn't watch a single Korean film till a, a lot later on. Um, I mean, the first one I saw was a film called City of Violence, which, you know, most people start off Korean cinema through Old Boy or some Kim Ji Woon film, but this was just, it was like, it felt like a John Woo film, but in Korea, and I had no idea what sort of country Korea was, and I think this was really a catalyst to watch Old Boy and these other creatives like from Park Chan Wook, Kim Ji Woon, Bong Joon Ho. Yeah,
And that was also, I think, for me, the entry into DVD was also that was where we had uh, the real explosion of Korean cinema that started to come out during this time,
yeah,
like Shuri,
mm,
and I mean everything, like like, and then just suddenly, and you could get these DVDs most of the time from the Korean market,
mm,
imported, and they would have English subtitles as well. So that
mm,
was a double bonus, and so
mm.
and you'd get. Uh, I was a big fan, and I still am. Shimun Ha. I was, and what was it? Tell Me Something, and Christmas in August, and
Oh, Christmas in August is absolutely
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, yeah. It's like
It-
kind of an Ozu film
yeah, it
in the
is.
modern age. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then so what were some of those examples? Well, let me actually take a step back and say, so by this time it was all like it was all more or less cinema from, say, it was Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, and was it more or less this was now where you were basically putting your flag, as it were, as a cinema
Yeah,
enthusiast? This
because
was, yeah.
because you would never see a film similar to like a Miike film in the West. I mean, or Tsukamoto. I mean, the closest thing you'd have to a Tsukamoto would be maybe Cronenberg, but we're talking about Cronenberg on acid. It was disorientating. It was so fast paced and immersive. I mean, I I love Cronenberg, but there's something about Tsukamoto, the way his camera speeds and the stop frame animation, it was just so refreshing, and just it made you feel uncomfortable in a good way. If you know what I mean, it's like I shouldn't really be liking this. I shouldn't be falling in love right now, but I am. It was, and what at the time at my, like, what would I have watched that would fill that gap that Miike or Tsukamoto could do in the West? There's nothing really, and and you know, Kitano was the, and Che and Fat were the two coolest guys. I mean, name me anyone that cool in the West. I mean, action stars at the time in the US, we had what, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis. Yeah, you know, yeah, they're cool, but these guys, I mean, hard boiled. let's talk about hard boiled. The first uh, fight scene is, it's got everything you want from a fight scene. It's in a tea house. You've got canaries. You're in the middle of a cocaine deal, and you've got cocaine everywhere, and just everyone's getting shot. He's going down a banister. It's just, this is like, oh my god, this is phenomenal. I mean, who really does this in the Hollywood? It's all explosions and, you know, one guy shooting at another person, but not like this art, this almost like a ballet to the choreography, and it's just like, it was so original, so refreshing. I couldn't see myself watching anything else.
That's so great. And you mentioned, you know, the first whatever it is, the first sequence at the beginning of Hard Boiled. And actually, before I go on, I have to say too that you, of the things that you said before, that one of my favorite moments in movies ever is it's of course, you mentioned Dead or Alive. You know, that first opening sequence is probably one of the most famous things ever that was ever
Yeah.
made. And in that, there are so many clever moments, and of course, iconic. But for me, it comes this. One of my favorite actors is uh, um, uh, Ren Osugi, and he's in that film, and
Mm.
he's also, and maybe he's known also for, or he, you know, for his many great appearances in Kitano films, but he's in Dead or Alive for a little bit. And there's a moment where he's just, he has this thing where he says, it says Yan, and he goes like this, and then he gets out of a car, and then it cuts back to him, and he goes, before there's a big line of the, yeah, but before he does it, he goes, he's like, and then, but that's my, one of my favorite moments in cinema ever. Yeah, I love that moment. Yeah.
I know,
I'm
that
sorry.
that
That's what, yeah.
that moment, that
Yeah.
scene is like, hold on, what did I just say? Oh, what? Wait, and then you're shocked at one scene, and it's just followed by another scene that you're even more shocked at. It's like, hold on, but that what is like, oh, what? Oh, hey, oh my, what? That's, and that is just the wonder that of Miike. His mind is just. I mean, also for a director to make over 100 films is just, obviously there is levels of standards in between those, and like, you have also got, like, I consider Audition a masterpiece. It's highbrow, but he does lowbrow movies as well, which low art, I could say, you could say, but they're still so entertaining. I mean, I think my my favorite Miike film is probably Fudo, The Next Generation. I mean, we did a stream on Miike, and I put that as my favorite all time Miike film, maybe on par with Audition. But yeah, it is lowbrow, just pure entertainment.
And it's amazing too, because he is a lot of the people that appear in his films. I mean, these are A-listers in
Yeah.
Japan. These are big deal, huge stars in Japan, and they have appeared in a lot of his films. And as you say, from the highbrow to the quote unquote lowbrow, and some of them in very compromising, very sensitive sort of scenes in terms of the graphic nature of a lot of them. And these are really big A-listers. And sometimes you might even see, not sometimes, but occasionally, you might even see Miike on TV in prime time, just doing some kind of variety show here. So he's I think maybe it was I forget what it was for what film, but I remember seeing him on TV, and people say so in other words he's not I don't think his whole filmography is known necessarily to the mainstream
Mm,
audiences here in Japan, but the people that are there and the films that at least the quote unquote mainstream or more mainstream films that he does, they are of course very marketable in this
yeah,
market. But as you say, his career is just immense, and
yeah. I think
it's
I've only seen such a small fraction of his films because
yeah
there's so
yeah
many and so many we
yeah
don't have access to in the
yeah
West,
yeah
which and the thing is with Japanese Blu-rays, they're so expensive for us over here, and majority of the time there's no English subtitles. I mean, it's very rare you'll see English subtitles, and then if you do, they're about like £35 for Blu-ray, and then you have to think about import fees, which are just through the roof now. I mean, the Corrida films have recently had Japanese releases, and they've got English subtitles. It's just, I mean, there's a couple of his titles I don't have, but they're just so expensive that you have to and ah about it. And at some time I'm gonna pick them up, but it's just is knowing when is the right time. I mean, I'm also picking up the Tora-san films, but individually, because I know I saw you had the briefcase set, and I do you know Josh Palmer? Yeah, we were messaging each other, and it's like, oh, Daisuke's got that beautiful Toro sunset, and it's like, I know. It's just by the time I buy that, and then I have to pay probably about £400 on top of that duty free. So what I've decided to do is slowly buy them individually. I've picked up, I think, about 5 of them or 6 of them so far. So I'm, I mean, I've only seen a couple Toro-san films, but I did enjoy them so much that I want to slowly start picking them up, and it'd be like a little project of mine to watch those, because they are brilliant films.
I don't know how well known they are outside of
And
Japan, right?
they're not
Mm,
at all, because whoever I speak to about it, I mean, there's a few guys, because obviously the director did Twilight Samurai.
yeah.
So that was the only film of his prior to watching the Toro Son. I might have watched some more, but I think uh, I watched a couple, and it was just like, oh, these just look so delightful and so charming, that I started picking them up, and I just think that they are lovely, lovely little stories, and they're just something you can go to now and again, because the characters feel so familiar.
Yeah, Torasan is like a kind of icon of a bygone era. The phrase is, I think, Showa. I think the phrase Showa era
Mm,
is I think particularly
mm,
well known now because of the Godzilla set for Criterion.
yeah.
But the Showa era is a particular era from in particular this it's referring, I think, specifically to the post-war era up to
Mm,
the through the 80s. And so it's this part of the history
mm,
that Torasan and other films, of course, but Torasan is
mm.
very emblematic of that. And so I don't know, I'm not sure how popular they are among film goers now. They are very famous, but of course they're not being made with regularity anymore,
No,
obviously.
no.
So, but they were at the time, and so
Mm.
yeah. So, oh, thank you very much for remembering the suitcase. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm very flattered. Yeah,
when we saw that, we were like, my jaw just dropped. I was like, oh my god, that is just, I've only seen a few, like a couple of them, like I said, and I enjoyed them so much, and that's going to be a little pet project of mine, is to pick them up slowly, slowly, because I don't think there is a demand in the West for them. So
mm,
I'd like to see maybe a few people pick them up and then have a conversation about them. But yeah, they so lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a certain type of formula that occurs with the Torasan films, as you know, and there's a type of almost kind of broad uh, physical comedy, slapstick comedy
Mm,
to a lot of the jokes,
yeah.
and but there's also a lot of the times that are there, and so I think they become these overall really rewarding watches.
Mm,
And for
mm,
anyone who's into Japanese cinema, I think will need at some point in his or her own journey to stop by the Torasan films, at least one of them, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, I watched a couple, and then I watched the 50th one,
yeah,
and I think the way they made the 50th one was, it was just, it was so emotional. I mean, I don't have that attachment to the character because I've only seen a couple of his films. I didn't grow up with these movies, but at the same time, you feel that emotion about this character and the way each character's relationship with Toro-san. And I think it was just, again, it was just beautiful. The nephew's story was just so touching.
so thank you so much for mentioning that, because it's really, those films are very important to me personally, because in particular my parents were really big fans of Torasan films, and so I think I picked up a lot of that from them. So
Mm,
they are really, I don't know if they're for everyone. I don't know if everyone's
mm,
going to like them, but because they are comedies, and so as you know, comedies might not necessarily travel
mm,
or very well with all audiences, but that's okay. That's okay. For those who
yeah,
like them, they really like them. So,
yeah,
but they are one aspect of a larger, let's say, landscape, if you will.
yeah,
But speaking of that, I think the question too that I also wanted to ask was, so going back a little bit to some of your comments that you made previously, which were about the how you decided that this area of film was for you, and you decided that, or maybe not decided, but you felt, or it came to be
yeah.
that these films were for you, and that you really loved to watch them, and this started in earnest your journey into quote unquote Asian cinema. But now I have to ask you, Hus, from your point of view and from your perspective, what does the phrase Asian cinema, Asian film, what does this mean to you? What import does it carry for you? And the reason why I ask is because, as you know, when we think of, for example, Asia, right, we think of a large part of the world that is made up of many different places. So if we think, therefore, of Asian cinema, we have essentially a phrase that refers to many different parts
Yeah, many
of
different
cinema.
cultures.
Exactly, cultures, and
Yeah,
not just in cinema. It's like, if you talk about, for example, uh, Hong Kong cinema and let's say Japanese cinema, they have very different, I would say, concerns
absolutely different.
and aesthetics. There are many
Yeah,
similarities, of course, but there are, of course, so many distinctions that are beautiful. And
yeah.
so it's like, so what does that mean in terms of an all-encompassing phrase,
So
Asian cinema? So what does that mean to you when people say that, or when you use that, or when people use that to describe this area or these areas of cinema?
I think it's down to the individual cultures that fascinate me. I mean, Japanese culture as a whole. I think it's absolutely interesting. The plight of the working man, and is always always plays a main character in these films. The way I feel, unlike, I think the way Japanese cinema is compared to the rest of Asia, it is far more willing to be uncomfortable, willing to be more extreme, which is something you don't even see in Japanese people as a whole. I mean, if you consider a film like R100, for instance, it I can't imagine any other country producing that, even within Asia. I mean, you would not see that in Taiwan or even Hong Kong or China. Definitely not in China. And I think, whilst I don't think it, you know, what is the phrase they use for the Japanese office guy? There's a particular term they use.
Salaryman,
Yeah,
salary man. So
salary
salaryman,
man.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. The salary man as this plain standard guy, which you see in every country, but the way the Japanese cinema takes this salary man and just puts him in the most uh, difficult positions, uncomfortable situations, like the way Shinya Tsukamoto does it, the way we see in R100, which is just, I think, one of the most craziest films I've ever seen, but most entertaining. I think it's so funny. It's one of the funniest Japanese films I've ever seen.
I'm so impressed that you've seen R1. But I guess it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't surprise me because your range is just unbelievable. R100. Wow. 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 How did you, is that released out in like Europe or UK or?
No, I've got the Japanese release of
Okay.
it. I had seen this. Oh, where did I see this? I can't remember where I saw it. And it, for the since the moment I saw it, I think it was actually Mark Commode had a screening of it. I don't know if you know who Mark Commode is. Yeah, he done a screening of this, and I just fell in love with this movie because I work in Soho. Well, I did work in Soho in London, and it just reminded me of the office workers walking around in their lunch breaks. And I'm after watching that, I just looked at people a completely different way because Soho is known for that sort of where people go for the sort of things that this gentleman in R100 was after from these women, and I think it's something like, and no one would produce a film like this. I mean, especially that end scene, which it turns into this like a battle, which you would not have thought would, starting the film, you would never think, well, this is the way it's going to end. It's just like, this is just crazy.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Is it? Are there other? So the filmmaker is Matsumoto,
Yes.
and I mean, are his films like are his films pretty much available outside
No, they're not.
of Japan or not really?
Not No, not at
Mm.
all. They're that's why you have to buy them on import. I mean, R100, I think I've got somewhere around here. I picked that up quite recently. There it is. Let me show you.
Yeah, Hitoshi Matsumoto. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's very famous here in Japan. He's another
yeah,
comedian, hugely popular.
yeah.
Ah, yeah, 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 yeah.
So that's the Japanese release.
Yeah.
I picked that up a month or so ago. Oh, and I was after it for so long. I mean, I think there is a US release of it, but that I think was out of print, which is crazy how the Japanese one is still in print. Yeah, it's a fact. I recommend it for anyone to watch. It's not one to watch with your family, but what that I wanted to do whilst I'm doing was talking about it. I wanted to do a morph on my face, uh, like myself finally picking it, and do you know that moment, where it's just like that sense of euphoria that he has. Absolutely brilliant.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because Matsumoto is one of those. He's as and in case people don't know, he's probably one of, if not the most famous comedian now, uh, maybe of a generation a little bit a little bit after Kitano. And
Yeah.
so he Matsumoto is on TV every day. Basically, he's all over the place. Yeah, all his
Really?
comedy shows are just like like phenoms, and he's all my and but his films are perhaps a little bit more on the, maybe I don't want to say obscure side, but maybe a little bit more on the quote unquote quirkier side.
Yes. Yes.
And so it that's another example of the great divide between the comedian persona and the cinema persona. We saw it with Kitano, but it's the
Yeah.
same, but it's also completely different. I would
Yeah.
argue it's such a fascinating
Yeah.
working, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. Wow, wow, another surprise. But that shouldn't surprise me because you are the man here.
Do you, I've often spoken about the film with Eric because I don't know if you know. I mean, the Asian movie enthusiast, but he also has this sort of taste of Japanese cinema because we did this stream on exploitation cinema, and pretty much all of mine were 1970s Japanese cinema or like some recent movies, and a lot of the movies, you even in Japan they don't even have like releases to watch. Like some of them, the only way to watch them are through adult sites online because for some reason I don't know how or why anyone would upload them onto a adult site rather than like a YouTube. But I guess YouTube won't allow some of the subject matter with. I mean, it was a very relaxed. It feels like a very relaxed era of Japanese cinema. Uh, so obviously, I don't think it would really be allowed on YouTube if anyone was to share it to the public. Yeah.
Yeah. It brings up, I don't consider myself to be any kind of, how should I put it, expert. So and as you know, this area of cinema, and when people say Japanese cinema, I mean it's all over the place.
Oh
Really,
yeah.
it's really it's impossible to keep up. Really, it's just
Mm.
I can't, and so it's really amazing like that. But one of the things that I think people know is that a lot of the studios and a lot of the distributors here in Japan, uh, if there's something that is somewhat taboo, they will never release it. It'll never
Yeah.
happen. And so you have these big studios like, let's say, Toho, and there are some pretty controversial, not well, yeah, there might be some controversial films on the books, and it'll never get a release here. It'll
Mm.
never. You won't even hear of it. And so the best thing you can do is you have to try to find, say, really cut up dubs, the dubbed version from elsewhere, that maybe from the
Mm.
US, that was now only on a, let's say, a VHS or something. And so
Mm.
it's some of these, and that creates this really weird, interesting dynamic, as you hinted, between the surface level, or the what might be called harmony on the
Mm.
one hand, and then the chaos on
Yeah.
the other, and the chaos being treated as not quite underground necessarily, but this almost this other avenues of availability need to
Mm.
be approached. And so this dynamic, I think, is very much part of I think it's so emblematic in a really interesting way of the cinema culture. And so I'm so glad you brought it up. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that because I remember hearing about Nikatsu. I mean, 'cause Nikatsu, they went through an era of just producing such great cinema, uh, and I don't think they realized what they were creating, because even to the point where they got rid of Suzuki and just had him blacklisted. But didn't they, when they stopped producing a certain type of cinema, they went into pink movies, didn't they? Which really that's really surprising for me because I guess I guess there's still a market for those types of movies because they're getting released in the UK now through Third Window. I mean, Third Window releasing because when you go onto the forums, you hear people um, going to the Roman pornos, the pink movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess there is a small market for these. But I mean, like Sion Sono, he did a anti-porno, which was a sort of a satirical look on that genre of films. I mean, he's one of the masters, in my opinion. We came to a conclusion in one of our streams that Sion Sono is a better director than Akira Kurosawa.
Mm.
In terms of when I say a better director, I would say his films are far more watchable than Akira Kurosawa's films. Now, I think that's of course it's open to debate, and I think you would see a lot of film scholars say, "Well, how can you say that Akira Kurosawa is one of the greatest?" Shion Sono created a film about a guy taking pictures up girls' skirts, and it's just. But I think Shion Sono is just there's just something so special about his films that is almost unexplainable. Uh, uh, um, I, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just if because I recently saw his latest movie, the Nicolas Cage movie, and I think he has this just such a great view on cinema. I I think it's about broadening the films you make, but I'm not saying Kira Kurosawa is not a great director. If you know what I mean, I've probably upset a lot of people by saying this now, and I'm going to get a lot. We're going to get a lot of comments, but I think it's one of those things which is so up for discussion. How a film can be watchable. I mean, it was something that Dion said, and it made me think about it. And I was thinking, well, his films are very, how you say, I think easy to watch and I think it's a very good place for someone to get into Japanese cinema, unlike Kurosawa, because I think you can't get anyone into Kurosawa films, but you could probably get most people into Shion Sono films.
No. I mean, well, first of all, the don't worry about. I mean, there's no rule. I
Yeah,
think there's no rule that says you have to like something or you
yeah,
have to, right?
it's all subjective.
Exactly. So that's fine. Of course, there may be people who might feel the opposite, but that's okay too, right? And
Yeah,
I
it's all
think,
subjective.
yeah, and also the how should I put it? Like I think the subject matter of Sono Sion, or Sion Sono, as he's known, right, in abroad. I think the subject matter. I don't. I mean, we've seen also in say some Kurosawa films where the subject matter can get quite how should I put it? Quite cutting edge, and
Mm.
and so there. I think it's maybe I think the subject matter itself is that's part of the cinema landscape. But I think for
Mm.
Sona, for me, it's um, I haven't seen the Nicolas Cage film, and I have it's a little bit hard for me to see the very
Yeah.
recent releases, unfortunately. But for me, there's also a kind of, how should I put it, a sort of generational thing that he's speaking to, which is
Mm.
very different, I think, from the generational concerns that we see in Kurosawa films.
Mm.
And he's speaking Sono, and he's giving us these lenses that seem, I think, very genre, but
Mm.
they are very relevant,
Mm.
and they do, and they are. I don't think I don't want to say the word youthful, but I think there's something of a very inherently generational aspect to his films
Yes.
that I think might go towards what you're saying about people getting into Japanese films now of a certain generation. Maybe it
Mm.
might be easier for those people to get into the works of Sono than, say, the works of Kurosawa. I don't know. That's how I might view it, but I don't
Yeah,
know how
I
you feel.
completely agree. No, I completely agree. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Exactly.
Hmm.
That's exactly the case. I mean, uh, the subjects are totally different. I mean, I think probably actually, if I was to give high and low to someone today, a younger person, I think they could straight away relate to the story. I mean, probably most countries have the same issues with the rich and the poor and people that have access to help in ways that uh, we see in high and low. And I think, yeah, I mean that for me is one of his, if not his greatest film, in my opinion. I mean, again, that is debatable. I love Akira Kurosawa. I try to own as many of his films as possible. I do think he is a master. He's an innovator of Japanese cinema, of all cinema, I should be saying. But yeah, I think in terms of getting people into cinema today, uh, someone like Sion Sono or me, I can't say Mike. There's no way you could give Mike to someone to get into Japanese cinema. You might even turn them off Japanese cinema. But yeah,
Uh, I mean, it's a tough one, but I think maybe Sono, as you say, he's maybe trying, or no, he is making. I mean, he has an impact already
mm,
on, say, the cinema landscape outside of Japan, and so we have um, what is it? Prisoners of the Ghost Land. So
yes,
so that I know people are beginning to speak about it and talk about it. So I haven't, unfortunately, I haven't seen it,
yeah.
unfortunately. So I don't know, but
It was only shown at Sun. It was only shown at Sundance this week.
okay, yeah.
So that's the only way we could have all seen it. It was, and but it's sold out so quick. I mean,
Uh,
I don't know if that was the case because people are Nicolas Cage fans or what. It was. Um, it's got Tak in it. Tak
yeah,
Sakaguchi.
yeah.
Oh, I love him. I
I mean,
absolutely love him.
I'm beginning to hear things a little. I'm trying to avoid as much as possible, but I'm
I
hearing I'm
uh,
hearing little rumblings about reactions to the film actually. So
yeah,
I don't know. But it seems like, oh, that probably is a good thing. It makes
yeah,
it makes sense to, understanding the types of works that Sono makes and is known for.
yeah.
So but it should be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully, I'll try to when it can become accessible for me. But
Yeah. But I tell you, actually, another Japanese director who I have been falling in love with his work is Toyoda, Toshiaki Toyoda, and I, uh, I mean, uh, Day of Destruction, which was his film from last year, was my absolute favorite film of last year. I it was um, it was post pandemic. It was the first film I saw, which was had elements about the pandemic inside, uh, and it. I don't know if your audience have ever seen any of his films. He did a film called Porno Star, which was such an angry film. Um, it it was his debut film, and I think it had elements of that film inside Day of Destruction, but it was just so much more refined. As a filmmaker, he has gone a long way. I mean, I'm still a big fan of Nine Souls. I think Nine Souls is just absolutely brilliant. It just has some of the most fascinating characters in a film, and it's about these criminals that escape prison, and yeah, it humanizes them a little bit because some of them are in prison for very violent crimes, but their stories about what they want to do with freedom, what freedom means to them, is just absolute. It's so touching, and I think he just writes characters so well.
interesting. So Toyota. So I'm so glad you. So, I haven't seen all of his works either, but But for example, you mentioned like Nine Souls, and also like uh, with the you have Blue Spring.
Blue Spring is
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
wonderful.
Oh, so you've seen Blue Spring as well, right? Oh,
Yes, yeah,
oh, yeah. So this is yeah. So this is the thing I have to ask you now, like for voices like uh you mentioned Toyota. I don't know what the status is for his films and the
uh,
availability outside of Japan. Could you
okay,
maybe use that as an example of how do you discover these somewhat I would say, I mean, they're probably, they take a little bit of searching
yes.
in
I
order to
mean,
find. So what is the process for you to discover voices like
n-
Toyota and others?
now I got in. I saw Blue Spring before any of his work, any of his other work, and
Mm.
I just fell in love with it. It got released by Third Window. His earlier work had a Blu-ray release as a digipack, and now I think he's one of the best Japanese contemporary directors. I mean, from the films I've seen of his, um, I mean, his films are hard to come by in the West. Uh, and I spoke to someone from Third Window. I said, "You guys need to release more of his work." I mean, it's just Day of Destruction is okay. It's just over an hour long, but uh, it's one of the most beautiful films I've seen. I said to them, you guys need to release this. They said to me, his films don't sell. We've released some of his best films. I mean, Nine Souls, the pack with his three first films, Blue Spring, and they just haven't sold. And it's just like, oh, I feel I've let down my subscribers by not talking about him enough. And it's something I wanted to do was, I think I wanted to pay a bit more attention to him, like in the next coming weeks, because I think he's just so underappreciated in the West. And we have access to his earlier films, which is just crazy. That's the thing. You either love a director, but you don't have access to his films, or you've never seen this director, but you have great access to his films. So I think that was part of my the reason for my channel was to, there's this guy, you really need to see him. I need to throw it in your face. Here, you really need to see this guy. He's producing magic here, and it would change your outlook on cinema. But it's a case of, I don't know, spreading the words as much as you can.
It's also, I mean, I would say also, and as I'm not, I don't claim to have my finger on the pulse of all trends in Japanese cinema. So I'm not the
Yeah.
expert, but my personal hunch too is that Toyota's films are not that well known even within Japan.
Wow.
And so there are, as I say, some pretty you have some very
Big stars.
recognizable, yeah, stars and faces in the films, of course, but
Yeah.
the I don't you they're not very let's say they're not known among
Mm.
the, let's say, the mass audiences, let's say. And so it's one of those situations that I think is the something that you speak of is probably it's reflective also of the domestic market as well as the international
Yeah.
situation. I
Yeah.
don't know, I mean, there I don't um well, it you can, I guess you can say that about a number of filmmakers both here and abroad. It's just a matter of the spotlight given to them. I mean, and
Mm.
what, as I say, unfortunately, it comes down to what sells and what doesn't, I
Yeah, I
suppose.
know.
So,
I know. I completely agree.
yeah.
Yeah, it's the same with another Taiwanese director, Chung Mong Hong. Is a He's relatively new. I mean, he has one film which is on Netflix. He actually is also a cinematographer and a novelist. He did the cinematography for a film called Great Buddha Plus. I'm not sure if you've seen that. It's very Coen Brothers-esque. Um, but his films are other films that I'm really getting into at the moment. I've been I've been sort of like ordering them from Taiwan, and obviously with the pandemic and Brexit, it's just been a bit of a mission to get them coming into the UK. But yeah, he's another great director that I absolutely love. He did a film recently called Soul. When I say recently, a few years ago, um, and it's like a horror movie, and it's got the actor that played the one-armed swordsman from the Shaw Brothers in it. It's an absolute. That's another wonderful director. I really recommend for people.
Wow, this is great. So I'm learning from you in real time, as is always the case with you and your channel. This is great. So
Yeah.
so the this I had so this is what how do you make your discoveries? Like
Uh,
what is the process for like trying to discover something new? Is it just do, what how do you pick these up on your radar?
okay. Well, with Chung Mong Hong, the Taiwanese director,
Yes.
I actually got into his work. Is I went to a East Asian Film Festival and I saw Great Buddha Plus, which is one of my favorite films of the decade. It's a, I think everyone has to see it. It's a very, regarding Taiwanese cinema, people who don't really see contemporary Taiwanese cinema, we always sing Ho Xiaoshen and Edward Yang. But I think cinema in Taiwan is really going through big changes. It's modernizing. It's very refreshing. So I saw Great Buddha Plus, and I loved the visual style of it. And I went to start looking into the cinematographer, and I found out, well, this guy's made movies, and not only that, I've actually seen one of his films already, which was A Sun, which is on Netflix, and I also recommend that for people. But it's not actually his best film. I mean, the best film of his I've seen so far is Soul. But yeah, so it's just deep diving from through one film and finding another director just by chance that he's another director that's worked on this film, which I absolutely loved. So yeah, it's almost like my process is luck and uh, reading as much as I can about the film. If I love a film, it's just reading as much about it as possible, from like the writer um, to the cinematographer, and seeing the aspects of that film that I love and delving into that aspect.
What how does that process for you uh continue on now with the current pandemic situation? Because as you say, you before you would go to film festivals, let's say certain maybe Asian or Southeast Asian film festival focus, etc. And then from there you'd discover certain screenings or certain let's say director series, etc. But what's the situation for you now in terms of that line of discoveries? Because of course pandemic has changed the whole landscape.
Well, I have got a bit of a relationship. I've built a bit of a relationship with some distributors in Asia, and I do get the odd screener as soon as they have English subtitles. Um, I mean, last year was not the best year because obviously film festivals were cancelled. Some went online. I mean, the only one I saw was Days by Simon Lang. Another great director. I think everyone is. I think everyone should really get into. I'm giving you a huge list to your audiences of directors. I think Simon Lang is a very much a go-to guy. So yeah, it has affected the films that I've seen. I've had to really beg for screeners from some of my friends in areas, and obviously I have Dion, who also works in the uh, industry. So we do speak a lot about films. He gives me routes to other distributors of getting access to. So it's the only way is just really trying to go to the source, because we're not going to see it at cinemas at the moment.
It's just changed so many things, unfortunately, and so it's just made the I suppose the road of discovery, it's just you have to adapt, I suppose, right? And
Yeah,
so uh,
it was a very difficult year last year for watching East Asian cinema. I mean, that being said, it was still, uh, I think the quality wise, it was still better than the West. I mean, the West, how many great movies did we see? I mean, obviously there was some great movies. I mean, I'm thinking of Ending Things, and we had Sofia Coppola make films. I mean, the streaming services did really well last year, um, but I think the East Asia did release some great movies, because obviously they got through the pandemic sooner than we did in the West. I mean, in the UK, we're doing pretty bad at the
mm,
moment. We're in full lockdown.
mm. There we go. Sorry, I was muted for a moment. So so it's a very serious situation.
Yeah,
So you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know I don't know how soon this can end, if at all,
yeah,
unfortunately. So, of course, fingers crossed that it'll reach a very swift conclusion. But you know, places are being affected everywhere, unfortunately, in their own
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
And sometimes it might mean that uh, I mean, cinema might seem in those circumstances to be somewhat of a, I don't know, distraction, or maybe a way to escape, or something, or maybe it's not the most important thing. But perhaps in these times, maybe it becomes even more important as
yeah,
well. I don't
yeah,
know. Yeah, I guess it depends
yeah,
on our journeys. But as you say, the theater going experience and the film festival experiences have been affected quite dramatically. I don't
oh
know when
yes,
they'll be back to where they were before, unfortunately.
yeah, I know,
But it means too that you are able still. Nothing is stopping you from making, as I say, these
no.
great discoveries. And
I think
so,
Simon Lang's Days, for instance. I mean,
yeah,
as
yeah,
I, I I am a fan of Simon Lang, but
mhm,
what he gave us with Days, which was his film from last year, um, is almost like a silent movie.
yeah,
It's about isolation, about
yeah,
love, tenderness, and again, I think he took time off from doing narrative films to do more experimental films,
yeah, yeah,
and he came back and produced an absolute beautiful film, because I think that experience really helped him out, and it felt like a follow up to The River,
yeah, 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 yeah,
which was, I think it was his second film or third
yeah,
film.
yeah,
But yeah, I think that's what I'm looking for, something different, something refreshing. I mean, Chinese cinema at the moment is brilliant with bringing out
mm,
new cinema, but obviously it's still doing the Husha cinema, which is just so repetitive, and um, it's almost like they're photocopies of each other, these films. But at the same time, they do produce some great films. Looming Storm, which was a
mm,
film a couple of years ago by Dong Yu. It's like about this security guard who's out looking for a murderer, because and I think it was sort of like a mall cop type investigator. He's got no knowledge about police work, but he's using anything that he's learned from films or books to help him in, fiction, to help him find this bad guy. And I find films like that so interesting. And it's from a country that doesn't produce these kind of films before, because they're of censorship of and they can only produce films of of a certain type that get distributed outside. So yeah, that's what I look for. Something that's fascinating, interesting. I mean, another film that it was like a few years ago, Miss Zombie by Sabu. I think he took Sabu took a subject of like a zombie film, and it's less about zombies and more about how in some countries they take. I know in Hong Kong, for instance, they take Filipino women to become, sort of like maids and nannies, and it felt more like a Anthony Chen's Ilo Ilo to, let's say, a zombie film. If you know, have you seen Ilo Ilo? Yeah, it felt more like that, but with a touch about a zombie subject to it. I think it was the most original zombie film since Shaun of the Dead, and I think that's a film that people in the UK have never even heard of.
How do you, if at all, how do you try to find the balance between, say, what you think your audience wants to see versus what it is you think they should, how should I put it? Like there's films that people will probably know, and then
Mm,
there's those films that people will probably have never heard of, and you think, as you
yeah,
say, oh, they really should talk about them. Like you mentioned Toyoda a few moments ago about how you feel like people should know more about his films, and maybe
yeah.
they're not so popular, and that's why they're not being sold as much. But so where do you find the balance between, say, like the quote unquote more popular stuff versus the really really obscure stuff, or do you really not make those considerations when you're trying to make discussions?
I There was a time when I actually tried to cater for what I thought my audience liked, and um, I felt like I wasn't. I ended up not speaking about the films I loved as much. Um, I mean, I've gone. I, I've I've started to think. Well, okay, you. I think this is more down to the fact that now I have the streams that we do once a month, and I think I've sort of allowed my personality to show a bit more in the streams because it's literally just so relaxed. We're just talking about some real extreme cinema in there and there's obviously films that are too extreme for myself. Um, and I think it's now more that my audience have realized, okay, this is Hurst, this is what Hurst likes. And I think I've just started to think that just watch just I'm giving you a range of, because I do like a range of films. I'll show some Husha cinema, some horror, some melodramas. I mean, I in the my last video, I had two films which are completely different in it. I spoke about Close Knit and Ujicha, which are totally different parts of the spectrum. And I've just decided I'm just going to talk about the films that I love. But obviously, my taste is so broad that I think I can appeal to everyone now, and I'm not just going to leave some films out because I think maybe people think it's boring. Um, I'm just going to talk about it, and surely there will be someone that will have some interest in it, because I know some people don't like Hong Sang-soo cinema. They find it maybe a little too boring, too slow paced. But I find him such a fascinating director. Um, and I'm just gonna carry on talking about the films I love, because I know I've seen some of UK YouTubers when they talk about him, because I can only refer to UK and maybe US YouTubers. They won't touch on Hong Sang Soo. They see one of his films because maybe Arrow released one of his titles, you know, and they're just saying, oh, I couldn't get into him. I couldn't get into him. But maybe my channel, and I think that's why my channel doesn't grow as quickly, because I'm talking about everything, and there are things that people won't like on there. And I know it's a very difficult uh, very difficult thing to pinpoint what people like, and you can either worry a lot about it to help your channel grow, or just grow slowly and people will like you for you. It's very difficult. I mean, I think, Daisuke, you're in a very great position with your channel talking about criterions, because criterions is so broad. And not only do you just talk about criterions, I mean, I love your James Bond conversations when you were talking about I think you did a series on Carpenter and Takeshi Kitano. I think that's so broad, and that is for everyone. And I think that's really where I'm going as well now. I'm just going to cater for the films I like, and leave it for people to pick out from what I talk about of what they like as well.
Yeah, this is actually this brings, oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for remembering and mentioning those little other projects that I've done. I really appreciate that. And I guess the reason why I wanted to ask you that is I mean, there's of course the YouTube aspect to it, but I think for me it's about, how should I put it? Like like one of the biggest, it's not really an issue, but one of the things I always struggle, let's say the thing I struggle with the most is, I don't always talk about well, okay, if I come across a film that perhaps I know maybe isn't as well seen, and that's not due to the fault of anyone, it's just the
No,
nature of the obscurity or the
of
lack of
course.
accessibility up to now, right? So of course there are different situations, but when it comes to a film like that, how do I discuss it,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if I want, I can't quite go into detail, or could I could, but it probably will,
There's no
you know.
reference
Yeah,
points.
exactly. So and then, so when you're making these discoveries, Hus, I
Mm,
suppose, where do you find how do you find that sweet spot between like focusing in on the subject matter, which will of course be very, I think, very enlightening for those who've seen it,
hmm.
versus trying to make it something like of an introductory aspect for those who haven't. And so
Yeah.
so you're in that great space where you're in both worlds, so to speak. And so, like, how do you approach that, and how do you approach, for instance, introducing these works to us, and what is your outlook on that, and how do you find it to be the most successful for you?
I What I try to do is, so I find an aspect of that film, whether it be from director, writer, cast, something that in somehow is linked to mainstream, if I can, of such. Um, if not, I will compare films to something that my audience is most likely to have seen. Like with Hong Sang-soo, I think, who can I really compare him to? Because maybe my audience don't really watch a lot of French cinema, which is probably the easiest way to compare Hong Sang-soo. But you could also compare him to maybe a little bit of elements of Woody Allen. Um, and I think you can only compare him. I mean, it's difficult with some Japanese directors and Japanese films to compare them to Western versions, because you can't. But I think with some humanistic films, you can sort of compare them to some Western films, or when we reference Western life in some ways as a comparison, but obviously it's slightly different, or is how it's a refreshing outlook on this. It's a very difficult, but it's all very dependent on the film you're watching. I mean, Hong Sang Soo is yeah, like someone like Woody Allen, but like Kurita how do you compare Kurita to anyone? I mean, who do you compare Kurita to? Ozu? I mean, he hates being compared to Ozu, but uh, you can a little bit. But then, what if that person's from a Western audience hasn't seen any Ozu? Is that it's very difficult. I mean, you just gotta give faith into your audience somewhere sometimes.
Of course, yeah.
Uh, but I mean, I know my channel is probably the niche of the niche of cinema, and so I think majority have some knowledge in Asian cinema. Even like I say, very few have got a small knowledge, but some have now picked up titles from Eureka or Arrow, and now they're just starting to delve into this area of cinema. So I think that's probably where my channel comes in. Is it's their starting point for some, and more as like a where do we go? Where do we go from this Arrow release or this Criterion? You come to my channel, and I'm giving you some sort of a certain map of your journey in a way.
Because you do focus, as I say, on those, for example, on those very prominent labels, but then you go beyond that, and you go
Yes.
beyond that in a such a spectacular way, I might add. You go above and beyond.
Another director that we've started in the streams over the summer was Oshima. We started going more into depth with Oshima's work. I mean, especially Dion, because Dion discovered Oshima during lockdown
Okay.
summer, and he fell in love with Boy,
Yeah.
and um, I just thought, God, I really need to what watch more Oshima. So I bought the Criterion Eclipse set
Yes.
of
Yes.
Oshima, and I think, oh, that is just one of the best sets I've ever seen from Criterion. Even it's on par with Zatoichi, the Zatoichi set. I think it's just a wonderful piece of cinema from one of the greats, and I think he's just so underappreciated in the West. I mean, people only see him for like Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. So would they see him? Realm of Senses, but
In the realm of the
obviously,
senses, yeah.
yeah, a lot of people are quite critical of that film. But he's someone that pushed boundaries, and he spoke a lot about the subject matters between like Japanese and Koreans, and it was from a perspective of a Japanese, which you never see, because when we see that subject, it's always from a Korean perspective,
Interesting.
the Chinese or Hong Kong perspective, and it's but to see it from a Japanese perspective was so refreshing, and I absolutely love his work.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because yes, his works, he's very much like what's his name? I know they're very different, but I like it. I like the comparison made to someone like the filmmaker Sidney Lumet,
Mm.
because each film by Oshima, Nagisa Oshima, is so different.
From the last.
Yeah, they're complete, like they are just completely just they're nothing. They're unlike anything that he's made before. So each film is its own little thing, and he
Yeah,
just does that all the way up to the very end of his career, which is amazing.
yeah,
Absolutely. And of course, I think a lot can be said about maybe the strength of his films in, say, the later period from versus the earlier period. And even in the earlier period, I mean, there were a lot of things that you talked about Suzuki, Seijun Suzuki, and his issues with studios and things. I mean, there's
yeah,
a lot there too with
yeah,
Oshima. And so yeah, but that is I think really among the most important works of Japanese cinema, this Japanese cinema history. Oh, that's yes, Boy, and um, Cruel Story of Youth. It's yeah, so
Oh,
it's
Kurosawa,
yeah,
again.
and so this is interesting. I wanted to ask you too, which was you spend, of course, a lot of energy in terms of what maybe we could call a lot of the new releases and contemporary filmmakers. And how so you have of course a lot of like the contemporary focus. How much of a focus do you have on the, let's say, the films from the past, like the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s onwards? Is it, and because it's tough to focus on everything, but is how much of it do you focus on, let's say, the contemporary versus how much of it you focus on let's say past works? And say
I
past works
always,
meaning from I mean, you can define that how you wish.
yeah, the past books I do tend to give some time to, or and even in some cases, just go on a lapse where I'm just watching and searching for Bunta Sugawara movies, where I just have this little obsession of his. Like I'm a real fanboy of his work, and you think the guy was doing Yakuza movies, and near the end of his career was doing the voices for Ghibli films, which is just, it's just like going full circle. But yeah, there are times where I'm just looking for actors' work, and I then make discoveries into other directors, and then that leads us as a sort of like to be continued, and then going to that director and his work. I mean, the we did a stream on exploitation cinema, and that was allowed me to really delve into Japanese cinema, into the point where I made some finds in there, which I'm later going to delve into even more. I mean, Black Type Killers, that was one that I just rewatched and then just fell in love with. And that's just a real out there Japanese cinema.
You know, I think I think the now we're starting to get a little bit more of the releases of like for example, he was known as Sogo Ishii, now Gakuryu,
Yeah,
but hopefully there will be more. I think Arrow is trying to make some inroads there.
yeah, they certainly are on that area. I mean, I can see
Uh,
some films never seen the light of day because of the subject matter.
yeah, but there are some hopes. I mean, I hope one of my favorite films is Crazy Thunder Road, and so hopefully that will get a good release outside of Japan one day. And I hope a lot of that's like one of the ultimate like
Oh,
punk rock uh, uh like biker Mad Max type of films from Sogo
yeah.
Ishii. So I wish that that comes out one day. But also like you mentioned Bunta Suara, I'm so happy you mentioned him. He's
Oh,
so
I love
yeah.
him.
Yeah.
I absolutely love his. I think he is
Yeah.
one of the most, one of the biggest icons from Japan. I think he's even. It's hard to say because in the West
Yeah, yeah,
they don't see
yeah,
him the
yeah.
same way. But for me, he's bigger than Sonny Chiba. I mean, Sonny Chiba is huge, but in terms of and they did films together, which
Yeah.
is even crazy. But to see them two on do films together was just crazy as it is. And yeah, I you know, I go into moments where I start delving into his work and Fukusaku's films
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well. I
Yeah,
mean,
probably the ones that people will know, probably, I mean, right, Boswell, Honor and Humanity.
yeah,
But you know, he's one of the icons
yeah,
of Japanese cinema. He's so cool. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that
uh,
look is just yeah.
yeah,
I do want to keep this conversation going, so let's continue this on another occasion if that's okay.
definitely. It'll be an absolute honor. Really would do.
Because I haven't even like we didn't talk about, for instance, we barely talked about mainland China, We talked a little bit
Oh
about
my god.
Taiwan, but we didn't even talk about, we talked a little bit about Hong Kong cinema, but we didn't speak it in more detail. So we have to speak
Or
about this
Korean
more.
cinema. Yeah.
Yes, yes, like just a little bit. So, and that's all on me. I apologize. I should have
No,
taken
no,
the
no. That's
conversation.
me as well because I'm delving so much into Japanese cinema. I guess it's what I've been watching a lot of recently. I mean, is it's all dependent on what you're watching at the time, I guess.
Yeah. And also, there are other places as well that we should talk about, or I'd love to hear your takes on,
Mm,
and just get your introductions and
yeah.
your evaluations and comments on. So let's continue this.
And
Uh,
also, Daisuke would love to have you on the stream at some point. I mean, it will allow you to really let your hair down, and it is fun. Don't get me wrong. I'm not making it out to be about the conversations are brilliant. I mean, the streams, these conversations, they're the reason why I got into YouTube, and I
mm,
think I've reached that pinnacle where I want it to be now, and that's so I'm quite content with YouTube. I could do the odd Blu-ray update, movie reviews, but to still do those streams are just they're the fun part. I mean, we're hoping our next stream is going to be our top 5 Nicolas Cage movies because of Prisoners of the Ghostland. We've just said, oh, let's just do something silly. I mean, Nicolas Cage. I mean, this is the most craziest actor in Hollywood, and we never really focused that much on Hollywood as much. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. Oh, that should be great. Oh, Nicholas Cage, what a talk about. We talked about an Oshima and Variety. I mean, that's another.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah. I mean, that, Nicholas Cage is. I mean, he's maybe like the Oshima of actors, perhaps. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's yeah. So, oh, that's going to be exciting. Oh,
Yeah.
wow, well done. So before we go, Hus, so let me just say one more time, your channel is A Touch of Film. So can you, yeah, that this is on YouTube, correct? For people who
Yeah.
are interested?
Yeah. YouTube channel, Touch of Film. I focus on mainly East Asian, but all East Asian cinema from Taiwan, mainland China, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan. I mean, this conversation just feels like we've all I ever do is Japanese cinema, but no, I do talk about other areas, the odd Indonesian cinema, movie reviews, Blu-ray updates, and yeah, uh, the odd going back into old films as well. I want to go back into talking about older films, maybe doing like video analysis. I did do a series called Masterpiece Sessions a while ago. I'm going to go back into doing those, talking about films that I consider a masterpiece as well. So yeah, uh, uh, that's what I'll be doing on my channel, basically.
Wonderful. So this is Hus at A Touch of Film. And once again, I think if you haven't met him before and you're watching this for the first time, it is evident, I hope, and I know it is evident that Hus is an expert and a very uh, deeply passionate film lover and enthusiast
Mm.
of all sorts. And so you are missing out if you haven't seen A Touch of Film, and Touch of Film, and subscribe and show him the attention and love, and ask him questions and ask him for his recommendations. As you can see, Huss will always come through, because that's the type of person that he is. So Huss,
Oh,
at A
thank
Touch
you.
of Film, thank you so much, my dear friend and sensei. Thank
Thank
you
you for
so
having me.
much.
Thank you so much.
And we
Really
will
means a
talk
lot.
again very soon.
Cool, definitely.
Huss at A Touch of Film. Thank you, and cheers.